Hello, are coding bootcamps worth it? Well, let's find out. I wanted to cover this as my first topic in YouTube, primarily because I did graduate from a coding bootcamp. And during that time, there was a lot of questions in my mind that I didn't really have a lot of answers to. And primarily the resources that you'll find online were lacking when it came to very specific questions about what to expect and, what will happen once you graduate from bootcamp. So I'll cover four basic topics: the admission process, the cost, the environment, the staff and instructors, and of course the curriculum. And finally, we'll conclude it with some final thoughts that I have a year later. Before we get into some of the topics that I outlined, I think it's important to go over why I decided to go to a bootcamp. I already had experience with front-end development, but my goal was to really become a full stack developer with a complete understanding of the front end, the back end, and how to persist data. It's also important to note that the way the bootcamp that I went to was built, at least the curriculum, was that we covered the front end first with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And at the time, they were still covering jQuery. And then you went over to Java and then SQL, and then you had to build a full stack application as your final project. To me, that was the ideal bootcamp, but I couldn't just pick the back end like I wanted to, so I had to go through the whole entire thing. Needless to say, the first half of the bootcamp was fairly straightforward. We went over HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and that was a breeze for me. I didn't have any issues really with the curriculum until I got to Java and MySQL. And I think one of the main reasons why I struggled so much with Java initially was because I had a JavaScript background, and Java is a strongly typed language, and you have to understand data types and how to pass objects, and understanding how to pull objects, and making sure that you're not mutating any of the objects as you're passing it from the view and persisting it to the database, and so on and so forth. So my viewpoint on that was very different initially, and I thought that that was a disadvantage rather than an advantage when I was going through the course. But it allowed me enough baseline knowledge to kind of expand myself as the curriculum went forward, and I found myself to be very successful throughout the whole entire bootcamp as a whole, even though I had some early struggles. I think it's also worth mentioning that prior to the bootcamp, I had about 15 years worth of corporate experience. I was a project manager prior to that, and then I made a career change, and then eventually went to a bootcamp to expand my skill set. And a year and a half later, I'm working in the industry as a developer, thoroughly enjoying myself and still finding myself that I love the development process. So the first topic I'd like to cover is the bootcamp admission process that I went through and what I think about other bootcamps and their admission process, and ultimately the cost of the whole entire thing. I think it's important to cover this because I don't find that the admission process is a great barrier to be in a bootcamp. As a matter of fact, most of these boot camps aren't really school in traditional sense, right? They are for-profit businesses. So it would be in their best interest to just let everybody in. But with that said, I do believe that there needs to be a layer to find out if the candidate is a good fit for that school or not. Not just on a student level, but also on a technical level. Coding is not for everybody the same way college isn't for everybody. And I think that if you made the admission process to these boot camps just enough to find out the aptitude of each individual, instead of just taking their money. Because what ultimately happens is that if somebody doesn't have a technical aptitude to begin with, they'll find themselves struggling the course and then quitting and being in debt. Like, that is not a good situation to be in. The whole premise behind going into a boot camp is gaining a knowledge and a practical skill set that you can take into the industry and be productive. And ultimately, hopefully, you love what you do. But if you don't have a process in which you're weeding out or you're filtering students, all you're really doing is you're causing a lot of stress for that person, and you're taking their money at the same time. That is not a good business idea or a good plan, in my opinion. So the boot camp that I went to here in San Antonio had a fairly straightforward process to find out what my aptitude was. They gave me a math assessment, a very simple coding assessment where it was basically, I had to go in, take an online test, which they provided for me. And then I submitted that. They checked it over. An actual instructor went in. There wasn't like a system that gave me a score at the end. It was basically like an instructor going in and viewing my code and then giving me feedback on it. And once I got past that stage, I did another interview. I think there was like 2 different types of interview, if I remember correctly. And then they gave me a tour of the school itself. I did go to a hands-on school, and it was all day, every day for 5 months, minus the weekends. But ultimately, you couldn't basically be working full-time and go into this boot camp full-time at the same time. It would be impossible. There just wouldn't be enough time in the day, especially if you're trying to learn a whole nother career skill set, right? Like, it would be a nightmare to execute both your full-time job and then going to school. I just don't think it would be possible. So after the formalities of the admission and interviews and the assessment, we went over the cost. And at the time, the boot camp that I went to cost around $24,000. That has since increased to $27,000 for 5 months, roughly 5 months worth of hands-on boot camp. Now, I know that's a lot of money, and I think that's the biggest barrier that there is when it comes to boot camps. Some boot camps range between $9,000 to $15,000, and I think on average across the United States, you're looking at about $12,000 for a boot camp. The one I went to was obviously twice as much as that. It's since increased in their price, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that the curriculum is extensive, and whatever it is that they're using to justify it, I still think is a lot of money. Do I think it's worth $27,000? No, I don't think so. If you look at a boot camp and a lot of these places, they're essentially career accelerators. So for 5 months, $27,000 versus a 4-year degree, which is roughly around $34,000 to $35,000 across the United States on average, you're looking at 5 months. It's a lot of money for somebody that is looking to switch a career, or they're coming from a low income situation already and they're wanting a change for their lives. So I think that's the biggest barrier. I don't necessarily think the assessment was all that difficult, but I do think that the cost itself is what's preventing people from applying to these things to begin with. And ultimately, once they do apply and they find out how much it costs, they don't want to go through it because they don't want to be $27,000, $30,000 in debt. And in my case, I had the Montgomery GI Bill pay for my boot camp, so it didn't really cost me a whole lot of anything. Matter of fact, they paid me to go to school. If you're not from the U.S., the Montgomery GI Bill is basically what you get when you join the military. It's a tuition fund that you can use for a technical skill or college or whatever it is that is allowed by the bill itself. There's a whole slew of things that you can apply the Montgomery GI Bill to, and that's what I used to pay for my boot camp. The next topic I wanted to cover was the coding bootcamp staff and instructors. And I think this is an important topic to cover, primarily because if your situation allows you to go see and meet some of these instructors prior to you shelling out over $20,000 or however much the bootcamp is, it's important to understand the quality of instructors that they have. I understand that it's really difficult off the bat just by meeting people, but in my case, we had a mixture of quality experienced instructors and also very new developers. Essentially, some of the developers that were teaching us classes only had about 2 years worth of development experience. So my suggestion would be try to meet the instructors prior to you joining, see if their personalities kind of fit your personality. But more importantly, what is their teaching style? Is it something that you can actually learn from, or will you be struggling to understand and essentially just be on your own? Because if you're having to do a lot of things on your own, even though you're in a classroom, you might as well just teach yourself how to code. So the next topic I wanted to cover was the coding bootcamp environment. I think this is fairly underrated. If you're going to a hands-on bootcamp, understand that you're paying for a lot of money. Some people are paying $15,000, $20,000 to go to these institutions, and just make sure that the building or the place that you're going to be learning is worth that effort and time. In my particular case, the boot camp that I went to was a completely remodeled building. It was an old historic building here in downtown San Antonio. They took over a whole entire floor, remodeled it, made some modern classrooms, had really nice large big screen TVs, and the whole entire environment was really, really conducive to learning. Now, if you're going to a boot camp and it's online, also take a look at the software that they're using to deliver the course. I think it's very important for you to understand that not only are you having to learn this new language, but also the curriculum and the system that they're delivering it on is also very important, that it's not cumbersome. If you're having to learn a new language and you're also having to learn a whole learning management system, this could be a huge disadvantage if the system that they're using is cumbersome. In full disclosure, I have never taken a online bootcamp. I have taken courses from Udemy, which are like delivered to you via video, and you're using your own system, your own computer. So I don't have an experience in virtual learning in that sense, right? But I still think is important, and as a key point is how easy is their system to use. And the last topic I wanted to cover was the bootcamp curriculum. And let's be honest here. No curriculum, especially in web development, is worth $12,000, $15,000, $20,000, even $30,000. It's just not worth that much. If you want to learn how to code and you have the self-discipline and fortitude to do so, you can do it by yourself without spending a single dime. The only thing it will cost you is your time. There's plenty of resources online that I can link below this video to get you started if you want to go down that route. But learning how to code and the curriculum that each institution or business is selling you is not worth that money. But with that said, the whole point with the curriculum and having a live instructor, whether you're doing it online or you're doing it in person, is that you have access to experts in the field immediately. And again, this goes back to the quality staff and instructor, which I suggested that you find for yourself whether or not this is worth the time and effort and money that you're going to put into your career. So having said all that, do I think boot camps are worth the money? I think some are worth the money. Not all boot camps are created equal. Certainly not all priced the same. It would be worth your time to do research, and hopefully this video has helped you out a little bit in making that decision. I think it's a great place to change a career or to start a career. Software development is a booming industry. I don't think there's a shortage of people looking for developers, but I also understand that it's not for everybody. So thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and thank you.